Hello, this is Aaron Wissner of Local Future. I'm live on the line with Nicole Foss from New Zealand. Nicole, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And let's see, it's Monday, August the 24th, 2020 for me, and it's Tuesday the 25th for you. Is that correct?
Yep. hmm
So it's been about what, a month since we've talked, 3 or 4 weeks since we've talked.
Yeah, something like that.
And I was on vacation camping with my family, so I didn't hear a whole lot of what was going on, but I do know a couple things. Number one, I know that in the U.S. It's Biden versus Trump, and even though it looks like Biden is up in the polls, people are still very worried that Trump might switch things around or sneak under the radar like he did last time with Clinton. I also know that schools are starting, public schools and universities in the US and probably most of the Northern Hemisphere. And so that's a big deal going on. And some hurricanes and some wildfires and some droughts and stuff. But some of the stuff, I mean, I just feel so lost when I look at some of the news because there's all these people are being indicted for things and charges being dropped and or put in place. And so why don't you catch us up a bit, Nicole, and tell us what's been going on in August 2020.
Well, in the US, regarding the whole election shenanigans, it's getting more and more complicated by the day. I mean, Biden is now officially the nominee, and Harris is the nominee for VP. Some people are happy about that, some people are not. But I think the biggest issue is whether or not this is going to be a free and fair election. And actually, I think at this point, there's no question in my mind that it won't be, because it's being comprehensively stolen in real time. So the biggest issue at the moment is the post office. So with the pandemic, the idea was that, of course, everyone will just vote absentee or vote by mail because this is perfectly possible. And so we can conduct an election freely and fairly that way. So this was a problem for the Trump administration because all the voting machines are hackable. So they'd arranged to steal the election the way they did before, but then everyone was going to vote by mail. So instead of just having hackable voting machines, it was necessary to destroy the post office, which is exactly what they've been doing for the last while. So the person they appointed to run the post office, don't know exactly how he got appointed. It was a rather shady business, but he's a mega donor to Trump, and he has no experience in postal services. He's a logistics guy, but he's not a postal service guy. What he's done since he was appointed, which was approximately when we last spoke, he's removed an enormous number of post boxes, and not only post boxes, but I think it's 671 sorting machines have been removed from post offices all over the country. A sorting machine can process in a couple of hours what it would take about 30 people several days to do. The idea, of course, is just to slow down the post, to make it less efficient, less effective. They've also canceled overtime. People are told leave mail on the mailroom floor. If it get to the end of the day, that's it, just leave it there. So there's a backlog. Every day there's a backlog. And so the next day starts with trying to deal with the backlog from the day before. And now the backlog at the end of that day is even bigger.
Now,
People
isn't
are
the
finding,
Congress trying to do something about this?
yes, but the problem is Congress actually has no power to do anything about it. What they've done is they've subpoenaed the Postmaster General to come and tell them about it. And he basically is telling them, well, too late, too bad, so sad. I've already taken the machines out. I'm not putting them back. It's fait accompli, which it is. They've destroyed the post office prior to the election.
Louis
Now, this doesn't mean
DeJoy,
you,
is that his name?
Louis DeJoy, yeah, or Louis, I don't know which way he pronounces it. But he's said that he's basically not putting any of the equipment back, that everything is closed. See, they've actually locked post boxes as well, not just removed them, but they've left some of them there and locked them so that you can't use them. People can still vote by mail, but they would have to request a ballot very early and return it very early to have any chance of it being counted. And this is a huge problem, because the idea that Trump has is just to cause so much chaos that you can't rely on the results of the election. So he's been saying for months, the election will be rigged. The only way I could possibly lose is if it's rigged. And then, of course, if he loses, I mean, he's immediately going to come out and say it's rigged. And his supporters will believe it because he's been setting them up for that for months and months and months. He's also said he's going to post law enforcement election observers at all the polling stations. This is called voter intimidation. They've already suppressed enormous numbers of votes by deregistering people. They've got hackable voting machines. They've wrecked the post office so that it's going to be very difficult to get the ballots in on time. So they've said that anything that doesn't arrive by election day won't be counted, even if it was postmarked a long time before the election. Trump is saying anything postmarked and anything that doesn't arrive by election day will not be counted. This is going to disenfranchise millions of people. Democrats will be far more likely to vote by mail than Republicans, partly because Republicans don't even believe in coronavirus because Trump has told them it's a hoax. So they will vote in person, and Democrats will vote by mail. The mail votes will be discounted in any way they possibly can be, and it's entirely possible that Trump will walk away with the election. It will be litigated, probably for months. It isn't going to be clean and neat. It isn't going to be wake up on November the 4th and know who the president is. It's going to be wake up on November the 4th to an absolute chaotic shit show with everybody claiming victory and everybody yelling at everybody else. And then people on both sides, especially the Republican side, picking up guns. So this is my concern. And it's just got exponentially worse in the last while, just since we last talked. That's really when they've had the destruction of the post office. And just to put the icing on the cake,
so
Louis
what is
DeJoy,
the rationale for taking these sorting machines out of the post office?
to slow down the post so that you can't conduct an election by mail.
What's the rationale that the postmaster is giving?
He's saying that the post office is losing money, so you have to rationalize it. The only reason that the post office is losing money is the post office is forced through legislation to pre-fund its pensions for 75 years. No other business has ever had to do that. No other business would be capable of doing that. The post office isn't capable of doing it either, and still run as a profitable business. So basically, Congress has hobbled the post office. This was, I believe, under the Bush administration that they forced it to pre-fund its pensions. The idea is it's a public service. Republicans don't like public service. They like privatized services. Louis DeJoy and his wife are huge investors and competitors to the post office. So he will personally benefit from the destruction of a public service that's actually the only one mentioned in the Constitution. So destroying the post office is not only criminal, it's unconstitutional, and it's being done for personal profit on behalf of the person who was promoted to run it, who is also a Trump mega donor. This is just yet more corruption, and they're not even trying to hide it anymore.
Who's supposed to be the checks and balances on this? I mean,
there aren't any anymore. Every one of them has failed. And that's the profoundly sad thing. That the framers of the Constitution never anticipated that not only would there be a criminal president, but that he would be backed up by an entire criminal party. So the checks and balances depended on at least somebody in a position of oversight being able to say this far and no further and draw a line in the sand. Every one of those checks and balances has failed. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the Supreme Court, because they're almost certainly going to get back the case over Trump's finances, and they may say, no, he can hide them. They may not. There was a hint that they may not do that with the earlier court cases that went to them, but you never know. He has stacked the Supreme Court as well. It's a bit of a wild card, but there's no reason to think that the Supreme Court is necessarily as free and fair as it may once have been. So he's taken over every institution, the IRS, all the tax people are on his side, so they don't hand over his taxes, even although the law clearly says you will hand over the taxes just by request of Congress. No need for legislative purpose, but no, the courts have reinterpreted the law against the plain face of the language to benefit Trump. And they're doing this a lot. So this is totally corrupt. The system is already broken. And I don't know what on earth Joe Biden would be able to do to fix it, even if he manages to win, because he would have to spend his entire presidency just trying to restore confidence in broken institutions. And he will be doing it against a backdrop of a Republican Party that tries to destroy everything he does, exactly the way they did with Obama. And when Obama was elected, the Republicans actually said, anything he's for, we must be against it. Doesn't matter what it is or who it would help or who it would hurt. If he's for it, we're against it. They shut down everything he tried to do for his entire 8 years, and then criticized him for using executive orders when the reason he was using executive orders was they refused to even contemplate any legislation he was trying to put forward. They were trying to make him a failed president, and they didn't succeed, although they did hobble him considerably, and they hung all sorts of millstones around his neck to make it more difficult. And if people think they won't do that to Joe Biden, they're dreaming in Technicolor. They absolutely will do that to Joe Biden, and they may succeed because they're that much more motivated this time as well. This is going to be a huge problem. The thing is, Trump knows if he doesn't win, he's going to jail. He has committed hundreds, if not thousands, of felonies. It won't just be him that goes to jail. It'll be all his family and all his friends, unless he wins this election or manages to get everybody pardoned somehow. But if he gets everybody pardoned, then there's going to be an enormous hue and cry, and the rule of law will be dead anyway, because people will say, well, if you take these people who've committed hundreds and thousands of felonies and you let them off the hook, why should we follow the law? And then you find people don't follow the law unless you force them. Then you've got surveillance and repression. So this unfortunately is the path that the US is on. It has been on this path for longer than Trump. Trump inherited a nascent police state set up with things like the Patriot Act, warrantless wiretapping, and rendition to black ops sites outside of the country. All of that happened under Bush. And this has been going on for a long time. But Trump inherited all those powers and is now abusing them to the nth degree. And he's also driving a Mack truck through every loophole he can possibly find and simply rewriting the law to suit himself by saying, I'm the president and I say this is the law, therefore it is. So he's completely sidelined Congress. Congress is supposed to make the laws. The House has been passing bills right, left, and center, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. Every one of them sits on McConnell's desk and goes exactly nowhere, while Trump rewrites the law through executive orders. He wants to change the Constitution through executive orders. For instance, to get rid of the 14th Amendment on natural-born citizenship. He thinks he can just write an executive order and say that's no longer the case. It would require a constitutional amendment with 2/3 of the Senate. But that's what the law says. He doesn't care about the law or the Constitution. He will simply do whatever he wants to do. And the law will be whatever people support it to be. So if he says, this executive order has just got rid of the 14th Amendment and the GOP is in power and they support that, then de facto that will be true. So he's rewriting the way your country works just to completely destroy every check and balance, every form of oversight. He's basically a king. He's saying he's king and you have to do whatever he wants. He even said when he was in North Korea that he really wants his own people to bow and scrape in front of him the way they do in front of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Never mind the fact that in North Korea, the reason they do that is because they'll be shot in the head if they don't. So what kind of country exactly is he looking for? I think I know the answer to that, and it's not a nice one. I'm glad I don't live anywhere near it, quite frankly.
So the question is, what do if all of this is the case, which I think most people, well, many people would find it hard to believe that all of this is actually real, then what is a person who lives in the US to do? I mean, it doesn't sound like voting is really a very effective thing to do. So
well, definitely vote. I don't want to discourage people from voting.
No,
voting.
I'm not saying that voting is not something to do. I'm just saying that it doesn't fix anything, because if Biden is elected, I mean, that doesn't necessarily fix anything. So let's just imagine Biden ends up being president. What can the American people do to help fix things that have been destroyed?
Give him the longest honeymoon period any president ever had, because he has so much more to fix than any previous president ever had to fix. And my worry is that people won't give him that honeymoon period, that whatever happens while he's in power, they will blame him for, even although it's not his fault. I mean, not only is all this political stuff going to land in his lap, and he's going to have to try and amend the Constitution, or at least how the Constitution is applied, but also all the financial aspects are going to hit in the fall as well. So you're looking at a whole lot of people who are like 40 million people facing eviction, huge queues at food banks. A whole lot of food got destroyed because it couldn't go into the commercial chain. So there may well be food shortages. Iowa got hit with a derecho, by the way. It's another aspect of what happened the last couple of weeks. A massive, basically inland hurricane hit Iowa and just wiped out the crops there. So, and not only the crops, the infrastructure, it collapsed the grain silos and things. It was basically a Category 2 hurricane in Iowa, where they don't have building codes that deal with that sort of thing. So the devastation is really widespread. So I think there are going to be food issues in the fall, partly because of flooding issues, storm issues, distribution system issues. So I think whoever wins this next election is going to inherit a situation that's teetering on the brink of disaster. And if it's Trump, he'll encourage that and make it worse, and then send the troops onto the streets if the troops will agree to do that, and they may or they may not. It isn't clear at this point. If Biden wins, then it's just going to be an absolute mess, and they're going to have to start cleaning it up pretty much on day one, but they won't be able to accomplish pretty much anything of their own agenda. They'll be having to spend all their time fixing the things that have been broken and trying to restore some kind of confidence, at least in some of these institutions. That's the huge problem. The trust has been destroyed. And when you destroy trust, it takes a long time to build it up again. So it's going to take a lot longer than 4 years to build up trust in institutions again. And it's going to be even harder against a backdrop of financial crisis, when trust tends to collapse anyway, and a hostile opposition party trying to encourage the chaos wherever they can, which is exactly what I expect them to do. So I think this is going to be a really unstable period. I'm not at all convinced that whoever wins the next election is going to get 4 years. I think it's quite likely that whoever it is, things are going to go badly wrong and they will be out of power one way or another, and someone else will end up in power. And this could happen several times in relatively quick succession. That's what happened in Argentina. I think they went through about 5 presidents in a couple of months. It was just ridiculous.
The U.S. has ever done that, though. I mean,
no, it hasn't. It absolutely hasn't.
During a term, but not more than 2.
My concern is that people may lose faith in the system to such a great extent that the whole mechanism, the machinery for providing for governance might just be thrown out. And it might just be, okay, we're putting you in power. Oh, you didn't solve the problem in 2 weeks. Okay, you're out. The next person gets a chance. That's what happened in Argentina. I don't know whether it would get that bad in the States, but I do expect people to be thrown out right, left, and center, impeached. I think impeachment is a guarantee no matter who wins that election, because both sides are not necessarily even going to have to look for a pretext. The Republicans will impeach Biden on day one over trumped-up charges over Burisma in Ukraine. They would have impeached Hillary on day one as well over Benghazi. They wouldn't even have given them an opportunity. And so if Biden wins, I fully expect that to happen. If Trump wins, if there's still the capacity to impeach him, if the House still has the House, if the House is still under Democratic control, then I would expect them to impeach him again as well. There's been a lot of new information that's come out regarding impeachable offenses, so there would be every reason to do that. Another thing you may well not have seen while you were on holiday was the Senate released Volume 5 of their own investigation. The House Intel Committee had been doing its own investigation along the same lines as the Mueller report, and they released that final report, which was the counterintelligence part, just last week. And it goes further than the Mueller report. It not only confirms everything that was in the Mueller report, but it goes further than that. So in terms of volume,
remind us, what were the conclusions of the Mueller report?
the Mueller report was in 2 volumes. So volume 2 was obstruction of justice. And he laid out all the elements of the case that you need to prove in order to prove obstruction of justice in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt. So he laid out the full elements of each instance of obstruction of justice, fully proven 10 instances of obstruction of justice. So that was volume 2 of the Mueller report. The idea was that that was to be handed to Congress. That was an impeachment referral. He had done all the legwork. He'd proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Congress was then meant to impeach based on those 10 cases. Now, and the Senate report said pretty much exactly the same as the Mueller report on that aspect. Where it was different was volume 1 of the Mueller report, which was all the work on collusion. And so what Mueller concluded was that he couldn't say that there had been collusion, which isn't a legal thing anyway. Collusion is a common term. It's not a legal term. You would have to say conspiracy or aiding and abetting and things like that, bribery, extortion, things that are actual crimes. But Mueller said he couldn't establish collusion beyond a reasonable doubt, or collusion or any of the actual crimes that would come under the heading of collusion. He said he couldn't establish that beyond a reasonable doubt specifically because of all the obstruction of justice, because people refused to come in when they were subpoenaed, they destroyed evidence, they lied right, left, and center. So because of all the obstruction of justice, he said he couldn't come to a beyond reasonable doubt conclusion on the collusion aspect. But the collusion he was looking at was very narrow anyway. His remit was only to look at before the fact conspiracy specifically with the Russian government, which is actually not what Trump was accused of. He was accused of working with the Russian intelligence agencies and the Russian mafia, and not as a formal before the fact specific conspiracy, but as a personal enrichment, bribery, extortion kind of conspiracy. So Mueller wasn't even looking at what was actually happening. He was looking at something that the whole Mueller report was set up to not find anything, not by Mueller, but by Rosenstein. So Mueller was not able to prove collusion, but he did say it should be investigated further. The Senate report has come out and basically said every aspect of the collusion, the conspiracy aspects and the aiding and abetting is also proven. So they have provided what should be an impeachment referral on the basis of a whole lot more felonies, not just obstruction of justice, but a whole lot of other things that come under the heading of counterintelligence. Now, there were machinations about this report. Senator Richard Burr used to be the head of the Senate Intel Committee. Unfortunately for him, he was caught red-handed insider trading. So they managed to find a reason to get rid of him. And they put in Marco Rubio instead, who's much, much more of a Trump loyalist. And they have done the same thing with the Senate report that they did with the Mueller report. Rubio came out and said, see, here's our report, no collusion. To which I would say, have you read your own report? Because it very clearly lays out collusion. But that's exactly what happened with Mueller too. This was a report that showed criminal activity. William Barr came out and said total exoneration, no criminal activity. He just completely lied about the contents of the report and then assumed no one would read it. Nobody read it, so the whole thing just got buried. And that's exactly what they're trying to do with the Senate report. So all this information is there about all this criminal activity, and how American foreign policy is now just based on Trump's whims as to his own personal enrichment on any given day. That's the sum total of the basis for American foreign policy today. People just have no idea that their entire country has been stolen out from underneath them. But this is what's happening. And at the moment, people still think, oh, it'll be all fine in November. It absolutely won't. November and the rest of the year are going to be awful, no matter who wins. There is so much that's broken, so much that needs to be fixed. and so many problems that are going to be looming to do with money and shelter and food and the very, very basic needs that people have. More and more people are going to find it difficult to meet those needs as early as the end of this year. So this is just going to be awful. People need to be psychologically prepared for the fact they're going to be living through some very, very hard times. And that's before you even think about what might be going on with the pandemic by then. We don't know for sure what will be happening, because one of the things that seems to be happening with the pandemic is you're getting these curves that go up sharply and then down almost no matter where you are in the world. So it could be that it might not come in waves like previous pandemics have done. It might just burn its way through once, and then that might be it. So that would be good news. If that is true, that would be good news. We don't know for sure yet, but it's possible. The alternative is you have COVID and flu at the same time. Now, of course, the things you would do for COVID, masks and social distancing, will also reduce people getting flu, probably quite dramatically. But still, you don't want to have two nasty viruses circulating at the same time. And it's possible that might happen in the fall. It is also possible it might not happen, but I think the odds are that it probably will. So people need to really think even harder about their COVID preparations, to say, whatever I had to do for COVID, I also have to do for flu, because I really don't want to get either one of them. And I'm not a fan of flu vaccines. I don't think they work, so I think they're pointless. So, even if they guess the right strain, the odds of it being effective are quite low. And often they don't even guess the right strain. So I'm not a fan of flu vaccines whatsoever. I am a fan of masks and social distancing and washing hands and all these things that actually prevent people getting sick. I also think it's really important that people try and deal with health. One of the main comorbidities with COVID is metabolic syndrome. So it's a particular kind of metabolic dysfunction, and it seems to underlie most of the comorbidities. So hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, all these things that are listed as comorbidities for COVID, every one of them is underlain by insulin resistance. So if people can deal with that, then their body will be in a better position to fight off COVID. So it's not just that. Also, make sure your vitamin D levels are good. And you can take supplements, but it's far better to be out in the sun. So if people keep their vitamin D levels up, then they will be less prone to respiratory infections in the first place, very significantly less. You also want to make sure you have plenty of zinc and selenium in your diet. Both of those seem to be micronutrients that are critical for pathways that affect the response to COVID. So there are tons of things people can do to be prepared for the pandemic. But also, I would say, make sure you have supplies of food, make sure you have a certain amount of cash on hand. The same kind of things I've been talking about as preparation for financial crisis for a long, long time. I think all of those preparations are going to really come into the fore in the second half of this year, beginning in the second half of this year as well, because I think people are going to have to look after themselves a whole lot more than they're used to, because all these centralized life support systems are cracking. And the problem is they're being defunded. They're actually being actively harmed by the administration as well. So regulations being rolled back, budgets being cut, qualified staff members being fired, loyalists who know nothing about the institution they're supposed to run are being appointed to run it. And so all kinds of things that people depend on are not necessarily going to be there. And if they are there, they won't necessarily function in the way that people are used to. So people are going to have to take a whole lot more responsibility for looking after themselves and their communities. And this is another thing I've been lecturing about for years, the need to download responsibility. So as we got bigger, we uploaded responsibility for so many things because we thought, well, it's such a large scale that this operates at. There's nothing I can do that would affect it in any way. So I'll just leave it all to the people up there somewhere who are supposed to be running these things. And I'm just going to assume that they know what they're doing. And that is an assumption that is not going to be borne out. Well, they do know what they're doing. What they're doing is actively destroying the administrative state. And they're doing it deliberately. Steve Bannon actually said that this was the game plan. When Trump was running, before he was even elected, Steve Bannon was his advisor, and he said, the point is to destroy the administrative state. That's what he's done. He's been arrested for it this week, by the way. Steve Bannon was arrested. You may not have heard that one either. There was a GoFundMe campaign for Build the Wall. It was called We Build the Wall. And they'd raised several $1 million for building private sections of Trump's wall. And the guy who set it up, Nicole Foss, I think his name was, triple amputee vet, and Steve Bannon was part of it as well. Both of them were siphoning money off personally. So they've been arrested. So it's just one more grift, just more corruption, small beer compared to what the administration is stealing, but still, it's everyone associated with his administration. Almost everyone has been arrested, indicted, jailed. The criminality is absolutely rampant, but is mostly being ignored, and that's the real tragedy. The one case that bright light seems to be New York State. Cy Vance seems to actually be going ahead with investigating the Trump org for all kinds of corruption. So we'll see if that actually happens, or if, like last time, Trump just bribes Cy Vance to make the charges go away. That's what he did when Cy Vance was thinking of charging Don Jr. and Ivanka with corruption some years back. And then there was a donation made to his reelection campaign and the charges were dropped. So we'll see if that happens again. But the corruption is just insane. And the other thing that happened this week is Alexander Lukashenko stole an election in Belarus. And the protests there are out of this world, because basically his opponent won. They reckon about 80% of the vote, because some poll workers, the protesters invaded some poll stations and actually forced the poll workers to reveal the true results, and the opponent had won by about 80% at the ones where they looked. Lukashenko is claiming 80% of the vote, and he's saying he won't leave, and so the opposition leaders had to run away to Lithuania, and now there's a crackdown going on in Lithuania, and Lukashenko's inviting Putin to come in and deal with it. So Putin is trying to put the USSR back together again. He's already starting with Ukraine, took Crimea, is fighting in eastern Ukraine. Now he's using the dictator Lukashenko to be invited back into Belarus. So this is the start of putting the Soviet Union back together again. So that kind of geographical expansionism. And people have been looking at the protests in Belarus and saying, I wonder if this will be the US on November the 4th, with all those people out in the streets protesting a stolen election. So we shall see. So is that enough?
So much good news, Nicole. I love bringing you on the show because you have so much good news. And
well, there's very good news on COVID. That is good news, because not only is it possible that it might not come in waves, but it's possible that some people might be pre-immune to it because it's a coronavirus, and there are other coronaviruses out there, and most of them just cause a cold. But people who've had colds may have partial immunity to COVID as another coronavirus. So this might be why some places, even when they haven't locked down, are not seeing herd immunity require 80% exposure. It seems to be more like 15 to 20%, which is fantastic news. That would mean that basically hundreds of millions of people are going to live who might not otherwise have lived if that had not been sorry.
That's okay.
That had not been the case.
So I'm wondering, in Michigan, the first wave of kids start school.
This is going to be a problem.
The 25th
There
of August.
is going to be another wave from kids. So I think that one of the universities in North Carolina managed to have cases on day one. So they've already shut down again after only being open a week. This is going to happen all over the place. So I think education is going to end up being online this year, whatever people want.
Well, it's very strange. It's very strange in our school district because the students were given two options. They could either sign up for online right away, and then they would go through this company called Edgenuity and take their little video courses. And then there's a teacher at the school who's assigned to check that they are doing the courses in a timely manner and that they're answering with real answers and whatnot. Or go to physical school, in-person school, person-to-person school. And then if the school goes to virtual, those kids don't have to take the edgenuity classes, but they will actually get to continue their regular classes just live online, I guess, or something like that. So the choice was, do you want to go with this company with, you know, a teacher helping to support it, but then you're locked in for half a year, a semester, or do you want to risk sending the kids to school for, you know, a week or a month or whatever until the school's closed, and then they get to continue with their actual real teachers. So there's not a lot of great choices either way. And that's
I
just
suppose
one.
the other option is just a homeschool.
Yes, or find some online virtual school would be another option as well. But the parents would have to pay tuition to attend the online virtual school. So,
It
but
sounds like it's going to be
but
just
in Michigan,
chaotic.
there's like 500 or 600 different school districts. So each school district has a slightly different plan.
Oh, so it's not even just every state is different, but every school different. Oh,
Yeah.
oh my God. People are not going to know what on earth to do. And oh, that is going to be so hard on people.
Yeah, there's
And it's all going to change anyway. Partway through the year.
587 school districts in Michigan with 1.5 million students. And so each school district has their own plan. Well, some of them are gathering together as groups, like this Edgenuity company. It like 10 or 15 school districts are all going to use this as their online only option. And so they were able to negotiate a more favorable tuition for the kids, because of course they have to pay this company to provide these online classes. So
I'm wondering whether this company has any ties to Betsy DeVos. I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if it did.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is just the kind of suspicion that immediately pops into my mind, considering the level of corruption that's going on. And I mean, Betsy DeVos is just awful. Her mission has been to destroy public education. And this is a big step in that direction. So she's probably rubbing her hands together in glee at this point. It's not a nice thought at all.
Apparently it was purchased by Weld North Company, but I don't know who owns Weld North. I've never heard of that either. So yeah,
it's just the sort of question that I would ask.
Yes. So, and I see the unemployment rate. I mean, the actual unemployment rate is somewhere in the 30% in the U.S. right now.
It'll be about
stats.
that. Very, very high. And the additional unemployment insurance has been cut. So it was $600 a week. And the Democrats had passed legislation in the House to extend it. This, of course, got stuck in the Senate and didn't go anywhere. And they were having a big fight. And the Senate was basically not wanting to pass anything. And Trump signed an executive order which is completely illegal. He's not allowed to make monetary appropriations by executive order. That is the purview of Congress. But he did it anyway. And so he said there's going to be $400 unemployment insurance, but states have to fund 100 of it. And if they don't, you don't get anything. So it's going to be cut anyway. But in states that can't afford the $100 to add to the Fed total, the $300 that the feds are prepared to give, then people won't get anything in those states. So this is just a setup for destitution for millions and millions of people. People are also being thrown off their health care.
So is this going to be like, so Trump signs this executive order?
He already did.
But okay, sure. But if the states then fund the unemployed with this $400 extra, is there a guarantee that they're going to get reimbursed the $300 from the federal government if it's just an
Well, I think
executive
the
order?
300 comes from the federal government and the states have to top it up. I don't know the mechanisms for exactly how that will work. And I don't think anybody does, because when Trump signs these executive orders, he's just pulling something out of a hat. This is not a policy that's fully fledged and developed and as to how it would work. He just says, do this. Well, make it so, as Captain Picard might have said. But he has no idea how to make it so. He's just assuming that other people will figure that out. It's going to be a big mess. I mean, look at how many people are unemployed, and then think about how many people's health insurance comes from their employment. 40 million extra people are going to be kicked off their health insurance at the same time as Trump is trying to get rid of the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. There's a court case at the moment to strike the entire thing down. So this would be everything, pre-existing conditions, everything would be gone if the Supreme Court does decide to strike that down. So that would be an additional 20 million people with no access to insurance, and then 40 million people who lose employer-based insurance. So healthcare is going to be a huge issue in the States as well, even bigger than it already is, and all in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, the hospitals are going out of business because they can't reclaim money from people who haven't got any money, who are COVID cases that arrive on their doorstep. They can't send the COVID cases away, so they treat them. But if you have to spend a month in intensive care, and then you can't afford the $1 million bill, then the hospital has to eat the costs. And this is really playing havoc with the way the healthcare system works in the U.S. too. I mean, there have been so many impacts in a very short space of time. And I don't think we've seen all the fallout from that yet. But there will be fallout, and the fallout from different systems will interact with each other. So that's going to complicate the system even more. But people can prepare. I mean, all the things that I've been suggesting for a very long time are part of it, but also all the COVID side of it as well. The aspects of how to keep your own health so that you probably won't get it anyway. And if you do, then it will be a lot less severe than it otherwise would have been, which is really important, because even the mild cases can end up with chronic fatigue syndrome, heart damage, cognitive issues for the long term. And this can be people who are young with relatively few comorbidities or none at all. You really don't want to get this disease. So the fact that there are ways that you can prevent yourself from getting it, that's wonderful news. There are lots of things people can do, but they really have to start doing them, because it is a matter of downloading responsibility. You can't assume that anyone is coming to save the country. People have to do it themselves. And it is going to be really, really tough. And of course, you can't save the whole country, but you can save your family and your community and your friends. And if everybody's trying to do that, then you save the country. That's the way these things work. But it has to come from the bottom up. Nothing good is going to come from the top down for a very, very long time, I think.
I'm curious, how are things going in other places, like New Zealand, the UK, Canada, wherever else you're familiar? I mean, you talked about...
We had a bit of a resurgence with COVID cases here. And it was quite funny, because then Trump came out and said, oh, New Zealand has a huge surge of cases. We wouldn't want to be like them. To which we would say, our surge was 5 cases on the day when you had 42,000 cases. So it just is not comparable at all. There's a cluster in Auckland at the moment. They haven't figured out where it came from, which is one of the reasons that they're particularly concerned, because if they know where it came from, then they know their systems are working. But this seems to be a cluster that's arisen out of nowhere. Now they're trying to do all the work to figure out where it came from and prevent it spreading. So I think we have 100 and something cases at the moment in quarantine. But so far, all the cases they found in Auckland have been related to that one cluster. So it seems to be just the virus got through once. So Auckland is in level 3 again. The rest of the country is in level 2. So that doesn't really change our lives very much. For us, when we go places, there's a QR code on the doors of stores and things like that. We have an app on our phone, take a picture of the QR code, and then that's the contact tracing. So if there are cases found, then they've got all the data they need to immediately know where everybody was and to know who they would have to trace. So even although there are no cases in Wellington, as far as we know, we're at level 2, we're still doing all the contact tracing just so that they will have the data there if they need it, because then they can stomp on it instantly if they find something. We've also done extraordinary numbers of tests in the last while. So we've been absolutely on top of this. And Australia is having a hard time of it. They had another surge as well, only apparently in Melbourne. So parts of Melbourne are on full lockdown, level 4 lockdown. And then other parts of the country have no cases at all. All of Western Australia, I think, has no cases at all. But they can't move between states now. There have been restrictions on movements because of the cases in Melbourne. I think about 300 people died. And I seem to remember they'd managed to trace it back to, again, just one instance of a virus getting through. And then they didn't step on it right away. So it had got out of hand before they discovered it. And that's why they had to go for a level 4 lockdown and why they've had 300 deaths. Whereas because we're doing the monitoring up front before we even have a problem, if we find a case, we will be able to respond instantly, and the same thing won't happen here. In Europe, there's a resurgence of cases, typically in places that didn't have big outbreaks before. So it seems to be that it's spreading to secondary locations. Same in the U.S. So New York hasn't had a huge second wave, for instance. But there's a first wave happening all the way across the South and in parts of the West, for instance. So that seems to be happening there too. The places that didn't get hit before are getting hit now. And now it's Trump country that's getting hit. So this complicates life for the administration. One of the things you may not have heard while you were on holiday is it came out that the reason that there was no effective national response at the beginning was Kushner was in charge of the task force at the time, and it was only hitting blue states. They let it burn through blue states deliberately because they were blue states. So this, again, is illegal. It is grossly corrupt. And several lawyers who I've been following, really serious constitutional lawyers, have pointed out that there are several people in the administration who are now liable for culpable homicide, where you could absolutely prove beyond a reasonable doubt every element of the criminal case for culpable homicide for Trump, Kushner, and several other people in the administration. So they will be facing a tidal wave of legal liability the minute they're no longer in power. On the other part of the world that's interesting things going on, there's huge floods still going on in China. So there's going to be huge food problems in China as well, because so much of the area around the Yangtze River is the whole area where they grow the food. The Three Gorges Dam is still standing, but the level behind the dam is rising all the time. They've had several bursts of just insanely heavy rain, but they've been opening the sluice gates. So the dam doesn't have to just hold the water back. There are gates it can open if the water level is too high. So they've been opening a full range of sluice gates to let the water go downstream. That's why there's all the flooding downstream, because the dam can't hold it all back. They've had to let it through. It looks like the dam will probably survive, but it's hard to say because it's just flood after flood after flood this year. I think this is the 4th major flood in just this year alone. So even if the dam survives, which it probably will, it will probably have been damaged in various ways by having to deal with this. This is beyond its design specifications. So it's kind of eating into the safety margins, which is never a good thing when you're talking about a dam that's holding back water from 400 million people, because that's how many people would be flooded if the Three Gorges Dam went. So well, the world is a very interesting place.
Yes, that's a lot of news. I noticed on social media you've posted a couple things about like the GOP platform and QAnon and things like that. Anything interesting you've been paying attention to recently?
The QAnon thing is really interesting. QAnon is growing exponentially because it's like a virus. It's a mind virus. And the thing that interests me the most is about, I said, a month ago or something along those lines, I started to notice friends of mine here, like people I know in real life, talking about elite pedophiles and all this sort of thing. I was thinking, wait a minute, that's QAnon stuff. What are you talking about that? I mean, these people are not far right. These are sort of social justice warrior people in New Zealand, and they're spouting QAnon because QAnon has been disseminating all its disinformation through all these tree-hugging, crystal-worshipping social justice warrior sites all over the place, and it's breeding there under the radar. So you're getting all these suburban women who understood who Trump was a month ago, who all of a sudden think that he's the only one protecting all the children from the satanic baby killers that QAnon is going on about all the time. So it's all tied in with Pizzagate and all this just ridiculous crap. So QAnon believes that all of Hollywood and liberal politicians are satanic, cannibalistic baby killers, and that they're kidnapping children and literally eating them. This is what the QAnon conspiracy is about. You may have noticed there were rallies about Save the Children recently, just in the last couple of days. Those were QAnon rallies. So all of this stuff, they're using the hashtag Save the Children. There is an actual charity called Save the Children. They've hijacked the hashtag. Now the actual charity is pissed because it's completely destroyed their hashtag, their way of communicating with their membership. But this is all, it's completely fictitious, but people are falling for it like right, left, and center. And at the center of this story is the notion that Trump is the only person trying to save the children, that he's trying to take down this enormous network of elite liberal pedophiles all over the world, that he's some knight in shining armor who's coming to the rescue of all these abused kids. That is the theory. And that's what these people are spouting. They have no idea where it comes from. They don't know it's far-right propaganda. Well, the people who were originally part of QAnon know that it's far-right because they're far-right, and that's why they fell for it. But now it's become much more insidious. It's inserted itself sort of into the gene pool of all these little groups on Facebook. And Facebook is actually trying to take them down now, but it's having to take down hundreds of thousands of these groups that are spreading this disinformation. And because they've become hermetically sealed, a lot of these Facebook groups, people from outside the group don't see what's happening in there. So all this stuff is spreading. It becomes an echo chamber, and they're all bouncing these same ideas off each other and validating each other. And then reaching out to more Q stuff more broadly. And this is just going to step out from behind the curtain fully formed at some point. And it's just happened over the last few months. This has just gone absolutely viral. I mean, it's every bit as much of a virus as COVID. It's just a mind virus. And it is sucking people in right, left, and center. It's interesting. Read the stuff I've put up on QAnon on my page over the last while. I've put a lot of stuff up. It goes back a few weeks, but you can see how crazy it is and the kind of people who are falling for it. And when you're familiar with all the stuff they spout, you recognize it all over the place from people you wouldn't think it would come from. So it's not unless you know what QAnon stands for that you recognize it when people say things that you wouldn't think they would say. And then you recognize, oh, wait a minute, that was QAnon. These people don't know they're spouting QAnon, but that's what they're doing. That this is very dangerous. This is another way that they're trying to steal the election, is by spreading disinformation That's one kind of disinformation, but there's enormous amounts of disinformation that are being spread. And the kind of emails that the administration is sending out to their supporters, it's like, oh, President Trump knows that you're one of our keenest supporters. And I wrote to you as the president's son and you ignored me. But the president has asked me to write to you again because he knows how much you support us. And all this sort of thing, this crap. It's this sort of manipulative advertising type stuff that's going out to these gullible, vulnerable people all the time, making them think that Trump is the kind of person who knows them personally, values them personally. And he doesn't value anybody personally except himself, but he's very good at conning people. Bill Clinton was really good at that too, actually. Bill Clinton, if you watch, when he was running for president, he would look at someone who'd asked him a question, and he would look at them as if they were the most important thing in the world to him at that moment in time, and it worked a treat. But even if he said one thing to that person and a completely different thing to another person the next day, the contradictions nobody seemed to notice, but everybody fell for the charm. The feeling that they were somehow being made to feel special by this person, that this person in power somehow cared about them. That sort of thing draws people in really, really effectively. And Trump is nowhere near as good at it as Bill Clinton was. Bill Clinton was a real charmer. I mean, covering up a whole lot of other things that were not so nice, but he was very, very good at the charm side. Trump is not a charming person, but his way of charming people is to basically tell a whole bunch of really horrible racist people that it's fine to be as racist and misogynistic and horrible to everyone as you want. And to them, that's charm, because they always wanted to be that way, and they didn't like the fact that society frowned on it. And now that they feel that they're allowed to do that, they're perfectly happy. So they're voting for him because of all his flaws, not in spite of them. So it's a completely different kind of charm offensive. So Trump doesn't even try and charm anyone who isn't part of his base.
All right. So why don't we wrap this up for today?
Okay.
And just reminding people a few of the things that they can do within their circle of power and authority and whatever. So you had mentioned trying to download more of your own responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically think about what you need in your life and where does it come from? So, I mean, you need shelter, you need food, you need water, you need energy, you're going to need some form of transportation. You know, where do these essentials come from in your life? What do you need to obtain them? So you're going to need money to start with. You may need physical access to certain things. For instance, well, energy. Well, you could buy energy in the form of oil and gas, or if you happen to have trees around, then you can maybe pick up some dead wood, and then you've dealt with your energy without needing money. So there are ways of doing it that don't involve money, but they're harder. Most things will involve money. If you can possibly manage to put aside some savings, you know, if you can manage it, 3 months worth of cash on hand, whatever 3 months worth of cash on hand would be to you, I would try and aim for that. I know how hard that would be. And for some people, it's just absolutely not possible. But if you can, having a certain amount of cash would be good. Not carrying debt, having food supplies on hand if you possibly can, things that won't spoil. You know, the essentials of your own existence. So all the dependencies you have that are on things from a long way away are going to be vulnerabilities. You want to reduce your vulnerabilities so that you have as much control as possible over the things that you absolutely need. Never mind the things you just want, because you won't be able to deal with those. Just deal with the needs. Those will be enough of a task for most people. So think about where these come from. Try and position yourself in a way that you have as much control as possible. It might involve consolidating an extended family in one property, for instance. That would be a good way of dealing with it for a lot of people. You pick the biggest house and the extended family goes and lives there and all looks after each other. And then you only have maybe one mortgage to pay and one set of bills. And if you find that your healthcare disappears, well, at least you've got lots of people to look after each other. There are lots of things you can do. But people have to start thinking outside the box, because most of the things you can do involve living life differently than you have been living it for the last while, possibly living it differently than you have ever lived it. Think about how big a house you really need. Think about what sort of things you really must have versus the things that would be just kind of nice to have. Think about where the money is coming from. Try and live on half your salary if you still have one. For instance, if you can get used to living on a lot less than your means, then you have some cushion. Whereas if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're spending every penny you have, if something goes wrong, you're in trouble right away. You really need to have some kinds of cushion. So cushion of things like food supplies, maybe some water supplies. For instance, we don't drink fluoridated water. My partner is allergic to it. So we have water containers of spring water in our basement. This is something we have to think about when it comes to lockdown, because we have to make sure that we have 400 liters of water in the garage, for instance. Not everybody has to do that, but that's just one aspect. And everybody's way of doing it will be different because everybody's circumstances are different. So I actually did a video called Challenge and Choices, which was going through this exact decision tree. So now you know about limits to growth. What are you going to do about it? And sort of going through the pros and cons of all the different aspects of the different decisions that you could make. So I can probably send you a few of those if you want.
Yeah,
If
that'd
you
be
want to,
great.
you can use them as discussion material and things like that. You know, at this point, you could probably even just broadcast it because it's several years old. So if you send me an address, I will send you a few copies of that. And then you can use the material to develop discussions and things with different people and things. But it is complicated when you have to go through a really complex decision tree to say, you know, if this, then that, this kind of logic system of logic gates and stuff. Not everybody's mind works that way. So it's good to have someone sort of walk you through it, I think. So that's why I put that DVD together, because people, I talked about, oh, you go through the decision tree and you look at how your life is going, you do this and this and that. And people would look at me blankly, and I thought, aha, I need to make a DVD on decision trees. So that's where that came from.
It looks like you have an article from November of 2015 on the automatic Earth called Challenge and Choices.
Yes, that would be the one where I was introducing the new DVD.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Nicole.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'm still working on putting together guests for you.
Oh, well, that's great too. Yeah, I have one in the pipeline as well. So.
Oh, good.
Who? I will. Megan Bachman did contact me, so
Excellent.
she's not available on Monday evenings, but she said she might be available like on a Thursday or a Friday. So.
Oh, she'd be excellent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. She will be a superb guest.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all your time, and for all the viewers. If you haven't done it yet, please thumbs up, add a comment, share, and like, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.